the chalk line had a really strong start, and then it just went downhill from there. I had reasonably high hopes for this based on the start of the film and also the concept. It sounded really interesting, and I still think it's interesting, but very poorly executed. I feel like the narrative was either badly written or they edited out some bits that would have helped flesh out the story. It felt very rushed. I still had more questions by the end of the film. There was enough information there for me to connect the dots and understand what was happening, but it didn't really flesh out the story enough in any way that was satisfying. So, as I said, it's either poorly written or poorly edited if they took out some scenes that actually would have helped pad things out. The performances are good. The narrative concept is really interesting. The execution is pretty terrible. This was released in 2022. It's directed by Ignacio Tatay. I apologise if I've mispronounced that. It is a Spanish film, and it's English dubbed on Netflix at least. And it's about a little girl and a couple who find this little girl wandering on the road. And this little girl doesn't talk. Occasionally she'll make sounds that are not... well, they're not in Spanish, so they don't understand what she's saying, and they have to try and identify what language she's speaking, if it even is another language, or if she's just saying words as children might do, and work out where she's come from. Really fascinating concept. And I won't say what happened, I won't say where she comes from or what happened to her, but I will say what happened to her did end up being interesting. I thought it was a fascinating progression of the narrative, but we didn't get anywhere near enough information about this. They basically glossed over it. We have the idea of what might have happened, the exploration, and then the outcome, all in about 15-20 minutes. I didn't time it, but it's roughly about that. We were getting quite near the end before we actually started to make any progress. That also means that nothing happens for probably more than an hour. It's quite a long film. It's about an hour and 45 minutes. And there is basically no progress at all for that length of time. And the child, who they call Clara, has some strange behaviours, some potentially dangerous behaviours. And then just nothing comes of it. It was completely pointless. It was put in there for shock factor. And yes, at one point it did make me gag. But it was completely irrelevant. And it didn't make any sense unless I'm missing something, and I might be missing something, but for me that just felt like they were trying to get the shock factor because the narrative itself was completely lacking for, I'd say, over an hour of the film. So great idea, good performances, horrendous execution. Maybe in better hands it would have been more interesting, it would have been better executed, but unfortunately what we have here is grossly inadequate for the narrative. The narrative sounded incredible. And as I said, when we find out what happened to Clara, I thought it was a good idea. I thought that was a good direction in which to take the story. But the execution of that idea was horrendous. So unfortunately, although at the beginning I felt like I would be giving this a fairly positive review, I'm unable to do that now. And with that in mind, I don't recommend it. The chalk line got off to a really good start. It was really promising. It could have been brilliant. But unfortunately, I'd say after the first 20 minutes or so, it just went downhill and ultimately ended up being really dire, very disappointing.